When people talk about the US-China rivalry, all eyes are on high-tech fields like semiconductors, artificial intelligence, space, and rocket technology. But the real battlefield of the future might be a stretch of dirt that looks utterly unremarkable. What? You see, as sand is actually one of the most powerful groups of metals on Earth, rare earth elements. These materials are the backbone of modern civilization. They're everywhere in our daily lives. Smartphones, speakers, hard drives, computers, TVs, EV batteries, even wind turbines. Without rare earths, modern technology simply wouldn't function. But the reason rare earths are now classified as a strategic resource is because of their role in military systems. Virtually every advanced weapons platform in the U.S. arsenal depends on them. In fact, more than 3,400 systems used by the U.S. military today rely on rare earth materials. Take the F-35 fighter jet, for example. Each one uses about 920 pounds of rare earths. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, around 5,200 pounds. A single Virginia-class nuclear submarine, over 9,200 pounds. From attack helicopters and anti-tank missiles to Tomahawk cruise missiles, radar systems, night vision gear, and sonar equipment, every piece of technology that underpins U.S. military dominance needs rare earths. Here's the problem. 85 to 90% of the world's rare earth supply comes from one country, China. China doesn't just have the world's largest reserves, it dominates the entire supply chain, from mining and refining to processing and manufacturing. That raises a serious question. If America's entire defense system is so deeply dependent on its biggest geopolitical rival, perhaps even a future enemy, how long can this dangerous imbalance continue? This is a sensitive issue. Politicians on both sides rarely discuss it in public, and as a result, the general public knows little about what could be the single most important factor in national security and global stability. So today, I want to walk you through what might be the most under-the-radar battle in the US-China rivalry, a fight that could shape the world order for decades to come: the rare earth war. Let's start with a critical question. Can the US and its allies realistically ramp up rare earth production in the coming years and break free from dependence on China? To answer that, we need to look at how China built its dominance in the first place. You might be surprised to learn that the first country to develop large-scale rare earth mining wasn't China, it was the United States. In 1949, American geologists discovered rare earths in the Mojave Desert, west of Las Vegas. But back then, these metals were seen as geological curiosities. It wasn't until the 1960s when scientists found that a rare earth element called europium could enhance the red color on TV screens that industrial use really took off. Rare earths aren't a single metal, they're a group of 17 elements, numbered from atomic 57 to 71. Most of their names are tough to pronounce, like lanthanum, neodymium, and praseodymium. Some are used for lighting and lasers, like terbium, which enhances fiber optic signals. Others are used for powerful magnets. Gadolinium, for instance, is used in MRI machines and CT scanners. One of the most widely used rare earths is neodymium, which powers high-performance magnets found in everything from electric car motors to your phone's vibration system. Here's a big misconception. Rare earths aren't actually rare. In fact, they're more abundant in Earth's crust than silver. There might even be rare earths in the dirt in your backyard. But the challenge is that their concentration is extremely low, and it's expensive and dirty to extract them. Only a few places in the world have deposits rich enough to be worth. Mining currently, the world produces about 390,000 tons of rare earths per year, while global reserves exceed 120 million tons, enough to last for 300 years. And geologists believe there's still a lot left undiscovered. So, why does nearly all the global supply come from China, when other countries like the US have over 1.9 million tons in reserves? The answer is both simple and brutal. Environmental. Pollution. Take a look at China's rare earth processing zones in Inner Mongolia. The sludge, acidic wastewater, and radioactive byproducts from refining would horrify any environmental agency. According to a 2021 study from Harvard University, every ton of rare earth produced generates 75,000 liters of wastewater, 12 million liters of toxic gas, and 1 ton of radioactive residue, about 2,000 tons of toxic waste in total. In countries like the US, where environmental regulations are strict, this kind of dirty industry simply can't operate at large scale. From the 1960s to the 1990s, the Mountain Pass mine in California was the world's largest rare earth producer. But after a radioactive wastewater leak in 1998, it shut down for 20 years. During that window, China's government made a strategic push to dominate rare earths. It built an end-to-end supply chain, from mining to refining to manufacturing, and eventually became the global superpower of rare earths. In essence, America gave up rare earth dominance because of cost and environmental concerns. Now, trying to win it back is more than just a race for resources. It's a test of political will, economic vision, and strategic endurance. To be fair, China was indeed the first country to realize the massive future potential of rare earth elements. At the time, most Western countries didn't take it seriously. According to former U.S. President George H.W. Bush's advisor, Michael Ike McGrorty, back in 1992, Deng Xiaoping made a relatively low-profile speech in which he explicitly stated that China needed to dominate the global rare earth market. He famously said, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." But at the time, the rest of the world had no idea what he was talking about, and no one paid attention. Looking back now, it's actually pretty ironic from an American perspective. While U.S. engineers were busy developing laptops, cell phones, and all kinds of high-tech devices, China was quietly taking control of the key raw materials needed to build those very products. One of the most rare, earth-dependent technologies is called the permanent magnet. Once magnetized, these magnets can hold their magnetic properties permanently, and just a tiny amount can produce a powerful magnetic force. That's why our phones, laptops, and other devices have gotten so much smaller and lighter over the past 2 decades. Here's the kicker. Permanent magnet technology was originally invented in the US, but the US failed to fully appreciate its strategic importance. In 1995, China acquired Magnet Quench, America's largest rare earth magnet company, based in Indiana. Not only did China obtain the patents and equipment, but it also brought American engineers to China to train local workers. Today, permanent magnets are widely used in advanced weaponry and defense systems. So, yes, on the rare earth chessboard, America made a wrong move, and Deng Xiaoping made the right one. Now, while Deng's strategic foresight was critical, China's ability to dominate rare earth production so quickly also depended on another factor: its low human rights advantage. 2 decades ago, China placed almost no environmental restrictions on rare earth mining and refining. There were virtually no safety protections for workers either. This allowed China to produce rare earths at extremely low costs, fueling its rapid industry growth. Take, for example, the Baiyun Obo mine in Inner Mongolia, China's most infamous rare earth site and the largest rare earth mine in the world. It also contains 70,000 tons of radioactive thorium. Extracting rare earths here produces massive amounts of radioactive waste. One of the most alarming issues is the enormous tailing pond built to store toxic and radioactive waste. Lacking proper anti-leakage infrastructure, radioactive material has been seeping into the groundwater for years. Back in 2005, a Chinese newspaper reported that radioactive wastewater was leaking toward the Yellow River at a rate of 300 meters per year. That article, and many like it, has since been scrubbed from the internet. But by now, it's highly likely the contamination has reached the river, which is China's second largest source of drinking and irrigation water. In addition to environmental damage, frontline miners have faced horrific health consequences due to prolonged exposure to toxic materials. Skin ulcers, respiratory diseases, nervous system disorders, and cardiovascular failure are common. Over the years, mining-related pollution has contributed to the rise of so-called cancer villages across China. These are communities where cancer rates far exceed the national average. As early as 2013, Wang Hao, a Chinese Academy of Engineering academician, publicly acknowledged that China had more than 200 cancer villages. But independent estimates suggest the real number exceeds 450. In these villages, cancer has become the leading cause of death. It's not uncommon for multiple members of a single household to be diagnosed. Even young and otherwise healthy adults are not spared. Farmers live and work in toxic environments, breathing sulfur-laden air, drinking water tainted with radioactive waste, and growing crops in contaminated soil. Death becomes a way of life. Over the years, workers, farmers, and local residents have tried to protest, but those efforts have typically ended in arrests or disappearances. The hard truth is, when a country can disregard environmental regulations, worker safety, and human life, it can produce rare earths far cheaper than nations that can't. So when China started flooding the global market with low-cost rare earths, US and other international producers couldn't compete, and many were forced to shut down. That's how China eventually monopolized the entire global rare earth supply chain, from extraction and refining to manufacturing. Among all known global reserves, China holds 44 million tons of rare earth resources, more than twice as much as Brazil, the second largest reserve holder. India, Australia, Russia, Vietnam, and the US follow, with the US ranking 7th with just 1.9 million tons, less than 5% of China's reserves. But at this point, the amount of reserves isn't the most important factor. The world only consumes about 400,000 tons of rare earths annually, and many undiscovered deposits may exist. The real bottleneck is refining and production, and this is where China's dominance is absolute. As of 2024, China is responsible for 69% of global rare earth mining, but nearly 90% of global rare earth production. You might wonder, why is there a gap between those two numbers? Mining just means digging up ore that contains rare earth elements. The real challenge lies in separating and refining those elements into usable materials. That's what production refers to, and China does almost all of it. In 2024, the world produced about 390,000 tons of rare earths. China alone produced 270,000 tons. The US came in second with just 45,000 tons, only 11.5% of the global total. From 2020 to 2023, over 70% of US rare earth imports came from China, followed by 13% from Malaysia and 6% from Japan. The bottom line? America still heavily relies on China for this critical material, despite the glaring geopolitical risks. Which begs the question, how did the US end up in a position where its defense systems and high-tech industries depend so heavily on a material controlled by a geopolitical rival? Over the years, China's monopoly on the rare earth market has actually declined. That's because countries like the US, Japan, and Australia have come to realize just how serious the problem is. After roughly 15 years of strategic planning, they're finally starting to reduce their reliance on Chinese rare earths. The turning point? A seemingly minor incident that took place 15 years ago. What you're looking at here happened in 2010, near the Diaoyu Islands, called the Senkaku Islands, in Japan. A Chinese fishing boat collided multiple times with Japanese Coast Guard patrol vessels in what was seen as a deliberate provocation. Japan eventually detained the Chinese captain, but then, 2 weeks later, China hit back in a surprising way. It completely halted all rare earth exports to Japan. The move sent shockwaves through Japan's manufacturing sector. As a major electronics hub, Japan depends heavily on rare earth elements, which are essential for modern electronic products. At that time, China's dominance over the rare earth supply chain was even more overwhelming than it is today, essentially controlling nearly 100% of the global supply. Following the Diaoyu Islands incident, China slashed its rare earth exports by 72%, sending global prices through the roof. Some elements increased fivefold within months. Although the panic lasted for more than 6 months and China eventually Resumed exports, the damage was done. For the US, Japan, and Australia, the message was loud and clear. They needed to develop their own rare earth industries and stop leaving such a critical supply chain in China's hands. Australia responded with a series of new laws and financial subsidies to support its mining sector. In the US, the Mountain Pass mine in California, dormant for nearly 2 decades, resumed production in 2017. Before 2010, Australia didn't mine any rare earths, but after watching China weaponize its supply against Japan, they started from zero and ramped up to an annual output of 20,000 tons by 2017. The US followed a similar path, from total dependence on imports to reaching an annual capacity of 45,000 tons last year, with steady growth still ahead. More importantly, mining companies from both the US and Australia aren't limiting operations to their own countries. Due to strict environmental laws and high labor costs, they've expanded into Southeast Asian nations like Malaysia, Thailand, and Myanmar. Take a look at this chart, and you'll clearly see how global rare earth production has shifted over the past 30 years. The red bars represent China. From 2003 to 2012, China was virtually the sole supplier. But since 2012, other countries have gradually emerged, slowly chipping away at China's market share. Light blue shows the US, yellow is Myanmar, and dark blue is Australia. Looking back, it's likely that Xi Jinping views then-President Hu Jintao's decision to cut rare earth exports over the Diaoyu Islands incident as premature. It revealed one of China's most powerful cards too early. Imagine if China still held the kind of dominance it had in 2010. In today's US-China trade talks or military planning over Taiwan, Xi's leverage would be far stronger. Compared to those long-term strategic stakes, the 2010 maritime skirmish with Japan now seems like a wasted move that alerted the West and gave them time to prepare. That said, the move was understandable. Before Xi, no Chinese leader had seriously considered reunifying Taiwan by force, so the Diaoyu Islands were treated as a top national priority at the time. Even with more than a decade of Western efforts, China still holds an overwhelming lead in the rare earth value chain. While its market share has dropped somewhat, it still controls 85–90% of the world's refining and processing capacity. Now, with US-China relations deteriorating again, especially with Trump reigniting a wave of global isolationism and protectionism, the question is, can the West truly cut its rare earth dependence on China in the next few years? The answer may disappoint those who wish for a quick decoupling. According to industry insiders and rare earth experts in the US, even with full government backing, it'll take at least 5 to 10 years before the US can become fully self-sufficient, and that's the most optimistic estimate. The reality might take even longer, especially for the 7 heavy rare earth elements, where China still has a near-total monopoly, and China knows this. Just last month, after Trump imposed 145% tariffs on Chinese goods, China's Ministry of Commerce and General Administration of Customs announced export controls on 7 key heavy rare earths: samarium, gallium, terbium, dysprosium, thulium, lutetium, and ytterbium. A few days later, the US and China quickly reached a new trade agreement. In my view, that was directly related to China playing the rare earth card. Some Americans, especially Trump supporters, are now pinning their hopes on Ukraine, claiming Trump signed a mining deal because of Ukraine's rare earth potential. But that's a false narrative. Geological reports from both the US and other countries haven't found any commercially viable rare earth reserves in Ukraine. Frankly, I think Trump was misled by his advisors. Back in mid-2024, Senator Lindsey Graham claimed on CBS that Ukraine had 10–12 billion worth of critical minerals. By early this year, he changed his tune and said, Ukraine has the richest mineral land in all of Europe, worth $2 to $7 trillion. From 10 billion to 7 trillion. That's a massive leap, and a clear sign he doesn't really know what he's talking about. For context, the total known global rare earth reserves are under 100 million tons, At an average price of $12,000 per ton, the total undeveloped market value is around $1.2 trillion. There's simply no way Ukraine could hold more than the entire world. Even if Ukraine did have huge reserves, you can't just flip a switch and start mining. After the war, it would take 10 to 20 years to build the necessary infrastructure before full-scale production could even begin. This is why I've long said that the US-China trade war is unsustainable. The reality is, a full decoupling from China is nearly impossible in the short term. China can choke the US, and the US can choke China. In the end, both sides are forced into an uneasy and fragile form of cooperation. I get that a lot of people won't like hearing this, but it's important to recognize China's real strengths. If you don't even understand what cards your opponent is holding, you're just fooling yourself. Sure, China has its weaknesses, and its economic problems are becoming more visible in recent years. But when it comes to rare earths, it still holds a powerful trump card. And only by knowing what cards the other side has can you figure out how to play your own. So let's bring the focus back to the core of US-China rivalry. America's card is semiconductors, and China's is rare earths. Who has the stronger hand? Of course, the US has more than just chips. It also dominates in pharmaceuticals, core software, even seed genetics. But if we just compare semiconductors to rare earths, I'd say chips are far harder to replicate, because semiconductors aren't something you can build with money alone. Advanced chip manufacturing involves an incredibly complex supply chain. Materials science, fabrication processes, design architectures, photolithography, EDA software, logistics, each requiring decades of R&D and top-tier talent, rare earth. Mining and refining, on the other hand, isn't nearly as technologically demanding. Yes, China holds patents and expertise, but nothing that can't be duplicated. The real challenge for the US is environmental regulation and high labor costs, systemic issues, not technological ones. And if things ever go off the rails, say full US-China decoupling or even war, those environmental and cost concerns will be tossed aside for national security. At that point, the US government will produce the rare earths it needs. But semiconductors? They're like masterpieces. You can't build a state-of-the-art chip factory from scratch overnight, no matter how much money you throw at it. Just look at how China has spent 20 years trying and still hasn't closed the gap. All in all, the US still holds the stronger hand in this global showdown.